Hi everyone, thanks for checking in. It's Adam Coburn here at Low & Co for the first Wellington market update for 2026. Thanks for checking in, and today we're looking at the results for the Wellington market in the month of January, first month of the year compared to the last couple of years, and seeing what trends are emerging. Overall, folks, the Wellington market has sort of had a wee bit of a struggle as we enter into 2026. Values and sale volumes are kind of spluttering, they're faltering a little bit. Message to sellers, it seems like the fundamentals in terms of the balance between supply and demand are weakening a little. Again, great news for buyers, of course. There is a veritable ocean of choice out there. So if you're a buyer, fantastic conditions for you. So let's get into the detail. Median sale price 732,500 versus 752 a year ago. That's down 2.6. Now, for quite a long time now, since about the middle of 2022, I have been saying that median sale prices have been broadly going sideways. So compared to the big drop that happened before or up to winter 2022, from there it did broadly go sideways. Having said that, over the last 2 years, it has been edging down ever so slightly. So broadly stable since winter 2022. In the last couple of years, though, a very gradual erosion of those prices. If you follow these videos, you know I don't pay too much attention to the median sale price. The better guide to underlying values is the Real Estate Institute House Price Index. So let's take a look at that. Start here with what I'm calling the league tables. This is the change in values since the peak of the market in late 2021. Wellington continues to hold first spot for all the wrong reasons, meaning it has fallen further than any other part of the country at 26.9% since the peak. Auckland not all that far behind at 23.6%, but everywhere else hasn't fallen nearly so far. So it certainly is those two big cities, the Auckland and Wellington, that have fallen furthest, further than everywhere else. Over the last 12 months or so, Wellington is still the biggest loser, although the numbers are much, much smaller, 3.5% down over the last 12 months, but it's still definitely a negative number. So as I indicated at the top, whilst broadly values have been roughly stable, there has been an ever so slight erosion of values over the last 1 to 2 years in Wellington. Over the last 3 months, Wellington doesn't quite hold the first place there, biggest loser. There are a few other regions which are challenging or which are ahead. Auckland down 2.2, Waikato down 1.3, Bay of Plenty down 1.8 versus Wellington's 1.1% down. So let's dig into the Wellington numbers more specifically. So if you look there at the graph, the three lines there, the blue line is the monthly results, the orange line is the 3 monthly cumulative, and the grey line is the 12 monthly cumulative. So you have to look pretty closely, but the blue line and the orange line are both below the zero, below the x-axis, which means small negative numbers for most of the last year. And so for that reason, the grey line, which is the cumulative 1 year result, has been continuing to deteriorate, meaning an overall larger annual decrease as we go through kind of the later half of 2025. So that those lines kind of look messy, but that's the overall trend. Monthly results continuing to be generally negative, and so that builds up to a larger negative number on an annual basis. If we look at the last 12 months across the various territorial authorities around central Wellington, definitely varying degrees of weakness there, but with the exception of Upper Hutt City posting a very small positive result over the last 12 months, everything else definitely negative to varying degrees, but generally significant, 3, 4, 5, 6% sort of thing. Over the last 3 months, it's a bit less clear. Still largely negative numbers, although they're not all that big. But certainly you can't look at those numbers and conclude there are signs of a recovery emerging. It's still overall largely negative. Wellington City, on the other hand, the only thing that has Wellington City stand out compared to the region is that in the month of January we posted a positive result, so underlying values increasing. Now that is kind of different from recent history. So one month's result doesn't make a trend, so I wouldn't hold your breath just yet. Let's not go out and celebrate just yet. Let's see what happens next month. Moving on now to new listings. So this is the supply side. 781 new listings in January versus 757 a year ago. So a small increase of 3%, a big increase, 35% more than January 2024. I find the red line is the most useful one to look at here. So you can see going right back to after the peak of the market as we were throughout 2022, a complete fall away in number of listings coming to markets. That was vendors saying, no, I'm not selling in these conditions. Prices are collapsing. I'm going to wait until prices improve. Unfortunately, prices didn't improve, but as we entered into the election, after the election, we saw this enormous number of listings coming to the market, and then for about the last couple of years, we saw general stability, but in the last 12 months or so, overall a declining number of new listings. Now, that general trend of declining new listing volumes over the last year or so has been positive news for sellers. However, in the last few months of that year, we've seen that trend reverse, and in particular, January was a very big listing month. And so again, you look at that red line, the last 4 months, you can see it ticking back up again. So that's not heading in the right direction for those of you who are trying to sell or thinking about selling. And if we look at the January result of 781 new listings compared to what's normal in a January, 657, we had a very big January when it comes to new listing volumes. So well above normal levels of new listings coming to the market in January. Interestingly, last January was also a very big listing month. So this January was only slightly ahead of last January, but both those Januaries are well ahead of what's normal for the month. On the other hand, number of sales, again, you look at that trend, the red line, you can see that since late 2022, early 2023, that trend has been very encouraging for those of you who are trying to sell or thinking of selling. Number of sales taking place generally increasing, not rapidly, but consistently. However, again, about 12 months ago, that started to flatline, and in the last few months, it's been very gradually easing away again. So number of sales on a 6-month average basis been slowly eroding away again. So it was encouraging for those of you who are thinking of selling, but in the last 6 months or so, that has started to weaken again, unlike the number of new listings coming to the market. So we've had very strong new listings coming on again with slightly weakening sales. That, of course, is the opposite on both counts of what you want to see if you are trying to sell or thinking of selling. And the number of sales in January slightly less than what we typically see for the month of January. Again, comparing it to new listings coming on, we saw way more than what was normal for the month in new listings, but sales not keeping pace with that in January. So overall, what does that produce? Well, median days to sell. How long is it taking to sell a property? 63 days in January. That is a long, long time. Now, January typically is a month when it takes a long time to sell properties. And the reason for that is that most of the properties that are selling in the month of January actually came on probably in November or sometimes early December, because listing volumes, of course, slow right down coming in towards Christmas. And then they don't start picking up again until late January. So the only things that really are selling in January are things that have been on the market for quite some time. That being said, even compared to what's normal for January, which is 47 days, 63 is a very long time. And it's the second to longest recorded duration to sell of any month since I started capturing the data in early 2015, so 11 years ago now. So yeah, definitely it took a long time to sell real estate in Wellington in January. Inventory, now this is the one data point which goes against the general theme that we're seeing across the rest of the data this month, and that is the inventory slightly less than what we saw last January. And indeed, over the last 6 months, inventory levels have been ever so slightly, very, very slowly, gradually decreasing. Typically what that means is market conditions improving. That's not what the rest of the data says. But nonetheless, 15.2 weeks in January versus 16.2 a year ago and 12 weeks 2 years ago. The red line shows you the overall trend there. It has been generally increasing for the last 2 to 3 years, albeit pretty slowly in the last 12 to 15 months or so. Having said that, in the last 4 or 5 months, the trend has been gradually decreasing. Number of listings on TradeMe, 3,334 as of a couple of days ago when we were recording this, versus 3,255 a year ago. Only slightly ahead of where we were a year ago, quite a long way ahead of where we were 2 years ago. But again, if you look at the trend, I find that more instructive often than anything else. And so you see that the big January result, as a result of lots of new listings, but not as many new sales taking place, that red line has ticked upwards there. And interestingly, for the month of February, we've got more stock on the market, because of course this is February numbers as opposed to January. But for the month of February, we've got more supply on TradeMe than we've seen for 10 years. So there is a ton of choice out there for those of you who are buyers. Great news for buyers, not great news for sellers. And there it is in another format, so slightly ahead, only slightly ahead of a year ago, but still the biggest February we've seen for 10 years. So in summary, folks, values have been drifting downwards in Wellington over the last year or so. New listings are up, but only up slightly versus 12 months ago, but similarly to last January, well above January norms. So we've seen a lot of new listings come to market. On the other hand, sales volumes have been plateauing compared to 12 months ago, and in particular over the last 6 months or so, they've been plateauing and then ever so slightly easing, which of course is not great news for sellers. And the number of sales taking place in January not quite up to where we normally are for a typical January. So duration to sell is very, very long. The second longest monthly duration to sell recorded since I started capturing this data 11 years ago. Now, inventory, on the other hand, has slightly eased, slightly come back, but it is still just above normal long-term levels, but well above the levels that we've typically seen in the last 10 years or so. TradeMe listings slightly up versus a year ago, only slightly up, but nonetheless, it's still the largest number of listings we've seen in a February since 2015. So, overall, message to sellers is the fundamentals are faltering again. It has become quite a tough market. Incidentally, it's not in this data, but I did just have a look at the number of offers that we're receiving here at Low & Co. And the number of offers we're receiving per listing has been falling away quite significantly in the last couple of months as we enter into for the early 2026, which again reinforces that the correlation is not so much seasonal in terms of number of offers taking place. The correlation is number of open homes being offered to the market. The more open homes, the more new listings, the more properties that are on the market, the less busy are our open homes, and the fewer offers we tend to receive per property. This, of course, translates to fantastic news for buyers. There is massive choice out there. Get amongst it. The buying conditions are amazing. So thanks as usual to the Real Estate Institute and to realestate.co.nz for the source data that I use for this analysis. Thanks to you also for checking in. If you want individualised advice, obviously, please reach out. It's Adam here at Low & Co. Otherwise, see you next month. Cheers.